Hi, everyone, and welcome to DEI Session 2, Trauma in the Brain. I'm Hannah Davis.
And I'm Claire Katzenson.
We are excited for you to be here today. Today, we're going to explore the impacts of trauma on the brain, the role of belonging, building resilience, and how oppression interacts with all of these things. I have a master's in psychology and a bachelor's in psychology, and I've had a few years now in social services. So I'm excited to be here today to connect the CASA role and the experience of children that are in the child welfare system with trauma in the brain.
Yeah, and then I have a degree in critical race and ethnic studies, education and sustainability. So long story short, making like long-term practices and services available for people in our society. That would be the ideal goal. I work right now primarily with like houseless folks. So a lot of trauma in the brain, I'm kind of getting at the later parts in life and how the trickle down can happen if there is not like supportive people who are there. So this is very important for like any ages, but obviously this is mainly through the CASA lens that we're going to be addressing all of this, but it's very applicable across the board. And thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Oh, did we want to talk about the document?
Oh, yes. And as we go through the session today, we'll be referencing a few different documents that were in the email that you were sent. So we'll go to the first one real quick, and that is the definitions and references. This will give you all of the definitions that we use throughout the training session. Again, as it says on here, this is not a comprehensive definition for each word. This is more of our working definition to help us for the purpose of this DEI training series. As we go throughout, you might want to add notes, kind of change things to what makes the most sense for you and helps you understand the different concepts we're talking about. If you scroll through this document, towards the end, you will find a list of references and resources that you can continue to explore throughout your time with us, or when we're done and you've gone through all the sessions. This is broken down per session. So you can look at all the different pages and figure out what session we're on, and then look at the corresponding references and resources. The second document that you'll want to utilize is the DEI activity packet. As you're going through session 2, you will have different reflection writing questions and things that we will be asking you, and you can go to this packet and kind of journal your answers or perform the activity that we are giving you a pause for. And if you have any questions, reach out to your case supervisor. So we will be going back now, as soon as it lets me, to the PowerPoint and starting the presentation from the top.
Okay, so we're talking land acknowledgements right now. If this is the first time that you're ever hearing about a land acknowledgement, this is a very common practice to pay respect to the indigenous tribes and peoples of the land that we are currently occupying. Um, we have, well, we have examples of specific land acknowledgements for the land that we're on. Hannah and I right now are in Medford. So we are on Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians land and Coquille Indian Tribe land, which if this is the kind of the first time that you're interacting with why is it more than one tribe, some folks, migrated, they had their own specific like patterns that they would follow based on like seasons or weather, any of those sort of conditions, or just, as time moves on and expands, constricts of boundaries that they're currently stewarding. So some things to be aware of is that there might be multiple tribes on the land, stewarding the land that you are currently on. If you're not in Medford, please take a moment to find the site right here in blue is a really good resource to find the specific tribes geographically, and then you can just like look up their land acknowledgement. Every tribe is different, so some of them find this act to be very, very performative in the way of if there are no relationships with whatever organization and the tribe, this practice can fall really, really flat. However, at CASA, There has been long-standing relationships and connections and partnerships over the years. So that is also why we are including this, because we know these folks and that is really important to them. Let me just look here really quick. Oh yeah, so then if this is the first time that you're engaging with this, we really encourage you to take some time to look into the land back movement. If there's any way that you can interact, engage, or give anything, especially if you are a non-Indigenous person occupying land in America or anywhere. Right now, being able to look into that and see if there's any tangible resources that you can give communities or volunteer, whatever that looks like for you. Also learning their history. It's huge to be able to know the history of, what happened in this area. I'm newer to this area myself, and so being able to find out things or key moments that have happened here, or even just what the current tribes are dealing with is very, very important. Anyway, very long-winded in that. Thank you for bearing with me. Now I'm gonna just read the two different tribe statements, and we're gonna go into that. So, for the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians, it says, we want to respectfully acknowledge the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial. We want to further acknowledge the tribe's deep cultural and spiritual connection to these lands, in addition to its entire interest and ancestral areas, which include over 6 million acres located within the Rogue and Umpqua River watersheds. These lands and the vibrant resources within them have been important since time immemorial and will continue to be a vibrant part of tribes' cultural identity for generations to come. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the tribe and thank them for continuing to share their Indigenous knowledge and perspective on how we work together to manage and care for these shared resources sustainably with mutually beneficial outcomes. We commit to engaging in a respectful, meaningful, and successful partnership as we explore shared stewardships of these lands. Give me a brief moment to get some water really quick, and then I'll go into the next one. Thank you also. Oh my gosh, is that my cat? We're also doing this training from home, which is a little bit newer to us. And I have a cat here. So, they're just frolicking and doing what cats do. Okay. So, the next one is the Coquille Indian tribe. And this, if it will expand a little bit. This one says, Indigenous tribes and bands have been with the lands that we inhabit today throughout Oregon and the Northwest since time immemorial and continue to be a vibrant part of Oregon today. We would like to express our respect to the first peoples of this land, the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, Burns, Paiute Tribe, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siosla Indians, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation, Coquille Indian Tribe, Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians, and the Klamath Tribes. It is important that we recognize and honor the ongoing legal and spiritual relationships between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. The interconnectedness of the people, the land, and the natural environment cannot be overstated. The health of one is necessary for the health of all. We recognize the pre-existing and continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and thank them for continuing to share their traditional, ecological knowledge and perspective on how we might care for one another in the land. So it can take care of us. We commit to engaging in a respectful and successful partnership as stewards of these lands. And the last part is this specific one is for multiple different tribes in Oregon, which is why so many different tribes were recognized in this statement. Anyway, thank you for that. Please look it up. Encourage you to do that due diligence.
Thank you, Claire. That was beautiful. And also, just so everyone knows, we did both have a little chuckle in the middle there. And that was because in the background, the kitty was up to some little kitty business, knocking things over and
just on the fridge.
just on top of the fridge back there. So that is what our chuckles were about. Okay, so if you go to that packet we showed you at the beginning, there is a reflective thinking exercise, and we're going to pause here for a moment so that you are able to pause in time to go over and fill out your thinking response. You're going to answer these two questions. What is your understanding of how trauma impacts a person? And what are some thoughts about behavioral issues you would like to challenge or explore? So taking some time to yourself and then come back over once you're ready. Like to give them time to pause.
I feel like it'd be fun if we had like little elevator music.
Oh,
Just for,
yes.
like a second.
Okay, hopefully you had time to pause and now you're back with us to talk about comfort zones.
Yes. Okay. So, um, first off, to start with, this is a great, fun visual. It is a complete oversimplification of this. So this is just meant to be some things that we're thinking about throughout this time. So if we're going to look to the right side of this, the visual aid talking about the comfort zone, fear, learning, and growth zones, they each have their own description on the very right there. And basically, we're bringing this up to acknowledge that for some people, this is a very like learning about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and especially today's topic about trauma in the brain. If you yourself have been through traumatizing situations, or let's say it is just a very difficult time in life right now, we're wanting to kind of go beyond just the initial surface level self-care, take a breath, do that. Please do all of those things. This is a virtual training, so it's built so that you can pause this whenever, come back, or completely turn it off and exit and delete this content if it's that. I challenge you to look into what we're going to be talking about with this slide though. But please do all of those things. However, keeping in mind that sometimes what makes us uncomfortable is highlighting things that are deeply needing to be engaged with, and maybe we haven't done that so far in our life yet. So being able to identify what zone are you in right now, for these trainings and the one today especially, which one would you like to be in? Which one do you think that you have a higher chance of being in possibly? Also, none of our trainings are triggering in a way where we are like showing horrendous things or anything like that. So just as we're not showing traumatizing events today, just to be clear about that. Um, and recognizing also not just in this situation, but how many times in your life or in your day to day are you, let's say intentionally stretching out to the learning zone? Are you learning things from sources that you don't normally go to all the time, or talking with people with opposing viewpoints, or just learning something completely new or different, to something you're already very interested about? Being able to identify why our comfort zones are so comforting is really, really helpful to understand what we can do in moments of like higher stress or when our values and beliefs and ethics are being challenged. Because having them challenged isn't a bad thing. If anything, it's expanding your own understanding of it. You know what I mean? Like if someone says, "Oh, why do you believe this?" and you say, "Well, I don't really know. It's just what I've been taught." That falls a lot flatter than saying, "Oh, this is what I think, but also I don't know this particular part about it. But I'm like interested in learning." You know what I mean? There's more complexity and you're able to hold more nuance and gray area. And that is just frankly what our life and living in America is made up of right now. Um, what was oh yeah, and then like when's the last time you kind of powered through that fear zone? Like for some people they don't immediately go from comfort to fear, but when was the last time that you were like, I am really nervous in this conversation, I'm having like somatic like body responses, like maybe you're shaking a little, maybe your stomach is gripping, or like your jaw is tightening? What did you do to get through that, and like how was that experience getting on the other side? Because yes, things can be incredibly nerve-wracking, especially when we don't want to offend or anything like that. But it's also really, really important for us as people and adults, and especially within this CASA role, to be sponges to new thoughts and thinking and terminology that's coming out, to be able to respond and support these kids to the best of our ability. Anything you would add on that topic, Hannah?
No, I think you did beautifully. It was perfect. And also, we realized that in this new way that we're doing this training, it is possible that maybe you are binge watching these and you're doing them one after another after another. So if you don't want to go through 5 sessions of hearing us review the, like the previous sessions, because we will do that every time we're going to start with our land acknowledgement and with our comfort zones, we're going to talk about also the definitions of a diversity, equity, inclusion. You can always kind of skim through that beginning and just make sure that if you're thinking like, I don't know, maybe I should listen to the comfort zone thing because I didn't really get it last time, but maybe I'll get it this time, just tune back into that section. But just something to be aware of. We will be doing this in each one of the sessions, not just this part, but the little beginning to get you into the content. It might be worth watching 5 times, but if you're binge watching, it also might not be. So go at your own pace. Okay, so now we're going to go into the unknown, and we would like you to, when you hear something that feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, or really just piques your interest, write it down. And then at the end of the session, just choose one of the things that you wrote down and go to explore it further. Jump down that rabbit hole, really do a deep dive into whatever that thing that you wrote down is.
Cat finally came down the counter.
Could see the tail on the fridge for a while. Okay, so our agenda, kind of like I was saying just a second ago, we are going to recap on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then we're going to jump into trauma through that DEI lens, the symptoms and impacts of trauma, how we can use regulation and de-escalation to help us, and then the role of resilience. We will also have this advocate star, and when you see this star, it'll be a chance for you to flip through your activity packet to the page that says advocate and write down ways that you can advocate for children in this specific scenario or in the context of what we're talking about. Okay, so trauma through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the role of belonging. Here again are our definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Remember, you do have that definition sheet that you can look through. Do we want to popcorn them?
Yeah.
Okay, diversity, bringing together individuals of all backgrounds and identities, including those with differences that historically and currently experience marginalization and oppression, such as age, gender, ethnicity, sexuality, class status, ability, and etc.
Equity, the quality of being fair and impartial.
Inclusion, the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure.
And then we always add oppression because it is necessary to this training, to this series actually. So oppression is the state of being subject to unjust treatment and or control.
Okay.
Do you want to go into this one?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so as we just mentioned, this is a diversity, equity, and inclusion training. However, those things are necessary to talk about due to oppression. So oppression is like the foundation in which, unfortunately, that all of these different terms are used to explain ways that we can engage. And it's kind of through the combination of them all that you achieve belonging and all of those different things that we're wanting in communities. So some of the culprits of trauma is in a easy breezy sense, like isms. We listed out a few here there, and I do say a few because there are so many more, and there's also interconnections between them. This is also on your definition sheet, and as it says on this slide, is in no particular order and not an exhaustive list. Sometimes it's very, very interesting to go and see also like new terms that are being created because we made, I think, this slide maybe last year, and just more things will keep coming up. We want to be clear that oppression is not, there's a difference between, how do I describe this? Like having systemic institutions and people and things that you can be negatively impacted about in your life in the sense of like homes being taken away, children, your life, your freedom. That is oppression, not someone just teasing you about something. You know what I mean? Like, we don't want bullying, we don't want teasing. And usually they do have ties in these different types of oppressions, but there is a difference in them. So we want to be really clear about, you know, also just like expanding our vocabulary and trying to be as specific as we can. Like, the role of CASAs is one that is really, really special in the sense that you all are able to write court reports that get written by almost everyone on a case, and being able to say, let's say if one of your kids is experiencing classism or racism or homophobia in their schools, and it is impacting their life and their treatment and the services that they are being offered and their social connections, that is huge to be able to name it for what it is, instead of like they're just having a difficult time at school. And it's not about assigning blame, but it's recognizing that most of the kids who are in the child welfare system are almost always dealing with classism. Um, there's more likely than not, and this is speaking like statistically from like working at CASA, most kids are dealing with ableism and a variety of other things. So we just want to be really, really clear that having these terms is not you pointing a finger at someone and being like they are a villain. It is about highlighting what these children are actually experiencing. I'm going to pause here to go get my small cat child out of the cabinet, so give me a quick second.
And I'll add that this is one of my favorite trainings for the reason that we are looking at, I think, taking kind of a unique lens here where we're bringing in trauma with understanding how oppression leads to that trauma, and then looking at that and saying, how is that impacting the person on the individual level, both like neuroscience wise, what's happening in their brain, and then how can you build resilience knowing that you might not be able to throw on a cape and end oppression tomorrow, and your children are likely going to continue to experience it. What can you do to help advocate for them, to help fight the oppression they're experiencing, and help create resilience within them so that they're able to navigate life to the best of their ability and able to heal and grow from the trauma and the oppression that they're experiencing, or regardless of the trauma and oppression, not because of it.
Yes, amazing. Thank you for that tie-in. I was just like, I know that this needs a connecting point, so thank you for that.
Okay,
Yeah,
we're going. Okay. The
okay.
role of belonging.
Smallest font on this one. So if you are able to like zoom in a little bit, would really recommend. So in the past, I've kind of given an example, but it gets a little bit wordy when I'm like using an example for all of these parts of the Venn diagram. So I'm going to kind of review it a little bit and say a couple of words about it. So the idea of diversity and equity inclusion as a training is, first we had to understand what those terms mean in our prior session. Thank you so much. Shout out to the people who watched that and engaged. Really appreciate it. So we have this understanding of these main three circles, okay? But the idea and the question is constantly asked, like, why do these three go in tandem together? Why are we not just learning one? You know, gone is the age of just a diversity training or just an inclusion training. And the very short-winded answer to that is it falls flat if it's not all three. And this Venn diagram is a really amazing example of that, because it'll give essentially a situation where, let's say there's only inclusion and equity in a space and there's not diversity. What is not being recognized? That means that there's not multiple perspectives in the room. Without multiple perspectives in a room, it's not going to be as applicable. It's not going to go let's say you're working on policy or something like that. It's not going to extend as far and be as accessible for people, because let's say you only have master's degree college graduates in that room. There is a way that, unless those people are being so intentional, and even with the best of intentions, it will not usually work for the most, like the people who maybe haven't had any education or had to drop out of school for various reasons. Just as an example, I'm not saying that as a blanket statement or anything like that. It just, more often than not doesn't work. So having these three components gives you the best chance of being able to foster belonging. Because when we think about our community, whether you're here in Medford or at CASA or anywhere that you actually care about people feeling included, there being equity amongst the people who are there and making sure it is not just a single tone of people in a room, being able for people to come and feel I am meant to be here. This is aligned with my values. I feel heard. I feel understood. I feel safe to be challenging or pushing boundaries in a positive way. You know, when we think of progress, we think of things have to move forward, things have to change. And I think that that is just something that we really wanted to acknowledge with this training. So the connection with this and trauma in the brain is that the opposite, and I think we have a slide on this later, is like the opposite of being isolated in trauma. Because yes, there are those like list of oppressions and that can unite people in community. So let's think of like the queer community, the LGBTQIA2S plus community. That is because of shared experiences and identity. However, is it fostering belonging and a sense of I want to be here in larger society or just even in that community? You know what I mean? Could be both. So we're wanting to bring this up, and I really want to read the belonging part that says, that engages with the full potential of each individual, where innovation thrives and views, beliefs, values are respected and integrated. Obviously, ideal goal. This is like, you know, a great like mission statement goal. You know what I mean? Like this is what we are wanting to foster here at CASA. And I know that they're like this training is a part of the goal for that. And yeah, just also being able to think of maybe like what are some spaces you've been in the past that one of these pieces have been missing? How did that feel for you? How did that feel for people who were in that space that maybe had other identities beside that were different than yours? And just be able to kind of question these dynamics a bit more instead of it just being the buzzwords that they are. We're really trying to break down the buzzwordiness that this training can be. Anyway, anything else you would add, Hannah?
Well, while Claire was talking, they gave really good descriptions of all of these, and it kind of had my brain going with an example. I like to throw in new examples every once in a while. So one thing that I think child welfare is starting to do really well on is this idea of diversity, equity, inclusion in how they are creating policy procedure and trying to implement new things. So for example, before, usually it was caseworkers and people that worked with the agency that all sat down and said, what are we going to do about problem A, B, and C? And honestly, most of the time that led to it not rolling out well. It didn't always work well with the children. It didn't really work well with the parents, etc. And so recently, they've started including a diverse group of people in their meetings and allowing them to take space, share ideas, to be to belong in that space and to have their voice heard. And this is really starting to create more of that sense of belonging for children and families in the system. And I'm not saying this is flawless. I'm not saying it's happening everywhere. But an example of this is that when they were trying to figure out, what rights should a foster child have, right? We have the Foster Care Bill of Rights that goes into every home. That was actually created with children or adults that used to be children in the foster care system. And some of the programs that they do or the work groups that they do, they're even paying the past resource care children to come in and have these conversations and to share their ideas. So it's no longer like their voices are being taken for free. They're actually getting, experience that they can put on a resume, and they're getting paid in real money for this. They also now have panels for parents to come and teach caseworkers about their experience with the system and what did and did not work for them. So they're allowing people that have really experienced the system to have a voice in training and in creating policy, which I think is really a good example of bringing all of those groups together and allowing more of a space of belonging and partnership instead of like a hierarchical process.
Yes. And I wanted to add this one point, which I found, which in our notes here, which I think is a really good like sum up for what you were saying, is that the desire for all three and to be able to foster belonging in a space is to make sure that collaboration, information, and then having creative and specific ideas and solutions to issues, again, to be it, all of it's kind of in the goal of positive, reinforcing change. And creating the world that we want to exist in. So there's a lot of things that are happening in this world that are doing that. I know that we get fed a lot of doom and gloom all the time. And yes, things are happening. Not good things are happening all of the time. But this is our soapbox moment where we are like, this is how we change the world.
Yeah. We have our superhero capes on for a moment. Right. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about othering versus belonging. So when we think of othering, we think of it as a survival tool where we're identifying us versus them. Maybe we're, back in the day in the woods, hunter-gatherer, we're realizing that that is a bear or that is a wolf, that is a them, we are an us, that is not safe. And we need to tap into that fear response system, fight, flight, or freeze. And it's a pretty unconscious process, and it's really based on bias and assumption. This promotes segregation, isolation, grouping, and focusing on differences. So it is our very quick response system to identify if we are safe or not in a given situation. That is the reason that we have othering happening in our brain. And then we have to more consciously working on belonging. And belonging is finding commonalities and seeing people as multifaceted. It's when we can identify that this is not a threat and that we just need to kind of emotionally regulate in this situation. And it is also where instead of promoting, that segregation, that fear, and that grouping, we are creating community and building a society where people are feeling connected to each other. So there's many examples of how people can experience othering. And I think that this is a good time to go to your activity guide and think of some ways in which your CASA children may feel othered. And I'll give you an example of this. So for example, a child might feel othered if they are sitting in a classroom and the assignment, and they're in resource care, and the assignment is to go home and create a family tree and interview your mom on her favorite tradition for your family. They may not feel like they're fitting in that moment, like they're part of the group, like they're part of the class, because that's not an assignment that they can achieve. So take a moment, we'll pause, we'll sit here in silence for a minute, and then come back to us when you're ready, and we will continue on. Okay. So there is actually scientific evidence that not belonging is painful. There was a study where MRIs revealed that parts of the brain that activate when we feel physical pain are the same areas that activate when we feel left out, socially isolated, or rejected. In this study that was done, they had people prick their finger and they looked at their brain and saw where this physical injury was activating in their brain. And then they had them read a script where they were getting kicked out of their society. They were being ostracized. They were, essentially no longer allowed to be a part of this world that they were used to being in. And the same parts of the brain activated during that reading that script that activated during the pinprick. And so this has pretty serious consequences when you think about it in the terms of what we experience in our society and especially what our resource children experience. I can think of many children that I've worked with, and not just resource children, are just our CASA children in general. I can think of many teens that I've worked with that have jumped place to place, that have made statements such as, I don't have a home, I don't belong anywhere, no one loves me, no one wants to be with me. And those are all really clear statements of not feeling like you belong. And so to feel that pain at the same level as physical pain, we really are seeing that even when kids are maybe placed in a resource care or in a treatment facility, if they don't feel like they belong, they are likely still being traumatized. They're not out of trauma. And so when we're trying to add all these resources and wondering why can't they just stabilize? Why can't they do X, Y, and Z? It's because they're really not in a space of healing. They're still in a space of trauma. And now you'll see over here, we have the advocate star. So you're going to go to the page in your activity guide that says advocate, and you are going to think of some ways that you could advocate for a child that isn't feeling like they belong. So either if you have a child that's experiencing this right now, you can go off of that, or you can go off of a scenario that I provide, such as the one where children are bouncing from place to place, or maybe the one that I provided in the last slide, where somebody is given an assignment and they feel that that they don't belong because they can't complete the assignment. Or maybe it has to do with, being in the resource home and they're the only one that's not a biological relative of that family. They're the only resource kid in that home. Another option could be that they are the only person in their class that's unable to go to an out-of-state field trip because their parent won't sign a form allowing them for out-of-state travel. So take a moment and then come back to us. We'll give you a second to pause. Okay, so now we're going to go into the symptoms and impacts of trauma on the brain. So this is the flipping the lid example. There are some really incredible videos out there that talk about the hand model of the brain and this idea of flipping the lid. So please go out, watch some videos. Some people can explain it really well. I'm going to do my best to kind of, regurgitate the information that I've learned on this in various trainings and classes. And if you've already heard this, that's wonderful, but it always helps to practice again. So you have the model of the brain in your hand. So here we have our prefrontal cortex, our cerebral cortex, and then our limbic system. So think hippocampus and amygdala. Down here we have our brainstem and our spinal cord. So our prefrontal cortex is there to help us process life, make decisions. It is the part of our brain responsible for reasoning and decision making. And then we have our cerebral cortex, which is more detailed reasoning and thinking and problem solving, like just a little bit more detailed than that prefrontal cortex. We also have our limbic system, which are limbic regions, which is feeding, reproduction, nurturing, and survival responses. So again, when we're going fight, flight, flee, we're kind of in that limbic region over here. And we have our brainstem, which is helping us with our automatic functions, breathing, consciousness, sleeping, all of those fun things. Our right. I love neuroscience. So to me, it's all fun things. And then our spinal cord carries our nerve signals from the brain to our body and reversed so that our body is able to, react to what our brain wants us to do. And we're going to just go into flipping that lid instead of identifying all these pieces because I could go on forever talking about them. So our flipping the lid is when we go from our prefrontal cortex, which is reasoning, to our amygdala. And our amygdala is responsible for our emotional response. So think of a toddler that can go from 0 to 60 over the silliest things. You go and you give them their dinner and it's their favorite food, and all of a sudden they go from sitting and happy and ready for their dinner to screaming and crying and laying on the floor because they wanted the purple plate and you gave them the blue plate. So that lid is flipped. They went from being able to reason to being totally activated by their amygdala, their emotional response system. Most people, science often says that it can take 30 minutes for the brain to regulate and go back to that natural state on its own. So if you're talking to somebody and something comes up that triggers them and they go from, having a really reasonable conversation to all of a sudden they are so mad and they are needing to walk away, and you are realizing that maybe this argument isn't going to go anywhere because their brain, their lid is flipped and they're not reasoning anymore. They're not making active decisions. They are from their reasoning cortex. They are making their conversation and their decisions right now based on really that emotional part of their brain, that amygdala. So what we need to focus on is helping people regulate and close that lid so that they are able to function again and not just act kind of out of that impulsive emotional part of their brain.
Oh, can I add a couple of
Yes,
things there?
absolutely.
Okay, so also something that I think is really interesting is the thumb is also representing the hippocampus, which is the memory center.
Yes,
So going off
absolutely.
of the example that Hannah was giving about the plates, let's say that you end up giving the child a red plate and they have a really bad association because something really triggering happened to them and the color red is associated with that. It may not make sense, as most triggers do not make sense to another person, that it is not impactful to in that way. But for that child in that example, that the lid is being flipped and they are not thinking from this like logical, also they're a kid. Let's hold space for like the fact that like y'all are supporting like children in this, even if they're teenagers, they are still kids. So memory and the emotional center is like working together in tandem in order to kind of create those more like escalated times and situations and moments. And then the other part I wanted to talk about was kind of the 30 minutes, is those are also people who usually have some form of a coping strategy. So let's think about like, not that we are focusing only on parents in this, but recognizing that like maybe the original guardians for this child, they only had specific coping skills. Like maybe they are somebody who is struggling with substance use, and that is their primary way of feeling better, shutting their running anxious thoughts around, or just trying to get to like a stream of one thought, whatever that may be, whatever that looks like in this incredibly vague example I'm giving, is that there are going to be people who can't do that. And it's also about practice. And we later in this training are going to have different slides talking about different practices to help de-escalate people and sit in that space with them. Because if that's something that they've never been exposed to before, it's like with cooking. Like if you haven't ever been exposed to like what it means to be cooking your meals all the time, it's going to be that much harder to get into it. And having a buddy is huge for that. And you all can be built-in buddies. So
Yeah, and you may also hear, as Claire was saying, this idea of triggers. You might have heard neurons that fire together, wire together. So let's say that every time the child heard dad's boots coming down the hallway with this loud rhythmic sound, their mom would say, "Go hide in your room, dad's having a bad day." And they're used to like, you hear him stomp, you go to your room, you hide. And so that trigger becomes that loud noise. Well, then maybe you're in a classroom and you hear somebody walking with a similar cadence as your dad did, and your first thought is, I'm supposed to hide. So neurons that wire together fire together. I know that I have that connection in my brain that says, hear that sound, do that motion. So I am going under my desk and I'm hiding. I am going and hiding under the back table in the back of the classroom. And nobody understands what's triggering me. No one understands that it's my principal that comes in to check at 2 o'clock each day, who walks just like my dad. And you are having that child is having that response because they are triggered, and they're going and doing the thing that they've learned to do. So what we'll talk about a little bit more is how you have to kind of rewire that brain. You have to create new neural pathways when you hear that sound to start associating it with good things and with different ways to cope, so that instead of going and hiding under your desk, you have different tools in your tool belt that you can utilize, and that they become just as easy as that hiding under the desk used to be. And the great thing about the brain is eventually, as we're going to talk about, atrophy will, I did not say that well, atrophy will happen, and that initial response that is maladaptive will go away, and you will have that new pathway that you created. So we're going to take a moment to look at the brain a little bit and understand some things about it. I don't know where to put us. That isn't going to be in the way. I guess that makes sense. Trauma's impact on the brain. So what happens when people experience chronic stress is really what we're getting at here. So first off, let's learn some different definitions. Atrophy is the gradual decline over time. Essentially, things that you don't use, kind of like when people say use it or lose it to muscles, same thing applies to your brain. If you're not using that neural pathway, your brain is going to kind of just get rid of it. Hypertrophy is the increase of size due to cell enlargement. And then again, we have our prefrontal cortex, which is doing the decision making, processing what's going on around you. And it is really responsible for reasoning, the ability to make reasonable decisions, not ones based on emotion. Then we have the hippocampus, which is looking at long-term memory formation and memory retrieval. And again, our amygdala is the emotional processing center. It's a quick response to social cues. It's talking about almost like it's in that area of fight, flight, or freeze, right? We are getting our really quick response, and we are deciding how we need to interact if this is a dangerous situation. It also does this wonderful thing. Another word for that is this wonderful thing called map to threat or map to safety. So your brain is taking in information, and your amygdala is saying, this situation is mapping us to safety. We don't have to react. And this specific situation is mapping us to threat, and we need to figure out what steps to take to be safe. Hypervigilance happens when more things in your environment map you to threat than reasonably should. So people that have experienced trauma may have a lot of triggers and a lot of things in their environment that automatically map them to threat. Maybe it's jingling keys, and you have to be able to see who's coming in and out of the door, or you can't be at ease. A number of things could make you walk around in the world and you're constantly mapping everything around you to threat. That's hypervigilance. And that's keeping your mind in a constant state of stress. So what's going to happen to it is that prefrontal cortex, and I usually point with an arrow in class, but here we go. Well, we're using the mouse today. Atrophy is going to happen to that prefrontal cortex because your amygdala is becoming more and more active, and you're not using your prefrontal cortex as much. So your ability to reason is going to start dwindling. That's going to gradually decline over time. And your amygdala is actually going to have hypertrophy and get larger because you are constantly activating that amygdala response system. So not only are you feeling that over and over, but you're actually creating growth in that amygdala because of it. So you're losing your ability again to process information and make reasonable decisions, and you're heightening your ability to have an emotional response. At the same time, your amygdala is, or not your amygdala, sorry, your hippocampus is also experiencing atrophy. So that is causing, if you think of kids that are having learning disabilities, they're not able to as easily remember things and recall information, because when your brain is activated like that, what you're remembering is your triggers and your emotions. You're not necessarily taking in new information that 2 + 2 = 4, because you're sitting there in fight, flight, or freeze, wanting to crawl under your desk while the teacher is talking. So abuse essentially abuse and neglect hijack the brain and stunt development, except in the amygdala, which is getting larger in these when you have a history of chronic stress.
A couple of points. Yes, fabulous. Take a breath.
Okay.
You deserve it. Take a sip of water. Okay, so we also have this term here, the transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. And the part that I like to bring up, even though it is incredibly unethical in my opinion, study is it was done with mice, and it was with cherry blossoms, where they essentially were looking at different generations of mice, same family, and they would be exposed to the smell of cherry blossoms, and then they would have harm enacted upon them. And they were looking to see if the generation after them, so like those mice's I don't know if that's the plural of it, but anyway, those mice children, they wanted to see if they had any adverse reactions without having exposure to cherry blossoms before. So the very first time that these mice children were exposed to cherry blossoms, they were hiding and expecting harm to come to them. So we bring that up because when Hannah is talking about mapping to threat and mapping to safety, that is also something that is like ingrained into us genetically, in the sense of seeing who and what those threats are to us, and that it also happens within our family lineage. So when we're talking about systemic oppression over history, and what's the word I'm looking for? Is it no.
Yeah, over generations.
Yeah, there we are, generational trauma. I was like,
Yeah.
I know that there's like a term for this. When we're talking about generational trauma, this mice study was one of the first ones. If you want to go look it up, but I just gave you the short and as brief of it as I could. And did you want to say something? Oh, okay. But that is huge to be for us to be able to know that it is not just about our own lived experiences, it is also about our families, and it's also about, you know, the bodies that we're in and the way that we're interacting with society, because maybe when we were in our country of origin, we were able to move around and navigate in a totally different way, because we were not othered in the same way, or we had different forms of community there. But now maybe in this one we are isolated, so it also demonstrates differences between families when it comes to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could see how maybe you know, feeling like you don't belong for generations in a family, if you were from a group that had been, you know, that had been oppressed, and generation after generation, your family feels like they don't belong in the society that they're in, how that could create some of that hypervigilance and that constant map to threat, map to safety. You know, a great example of this is there's many people that when they see a police car, they're not mapping that to safety, they're mapping that to threat. When they see police coming in to intervene, that's an instant map to threat. So if you kind of connect the dots of how a sense of belonging and all of these different experiences of oppression a person can have, can hijack a person's brain and and really create a situation where they're in a high amount of stress.
And affecting their responses. And then the last part I wanted to say is kind of in this acknowledgement of this last bullet point, where it's accept the amygdala. Since the amygdala is this emotional center, you see with people who have experienced multiple different traumatic events in life or chronic stress of a variety or lots of oppression, is there is usually a huge amount of emotional capacity that these people have, which can be incredibly beautiful because you're able to engage in life in the lovely parts in this deep and rich and beautiful way. However, it is also just a hypersensitivity to it all, to your emotions and to others, and being able to be impacted by that.
And by no means do I want to say that people that experience or want you to take away from this, that all people that experience oppression are going to have stunted development. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying is that if you experience abuse and neglect on a regular basis, that will stunt your development. So when we're thinking of our CASA kids, that is true. But you do still see hypervigilance and other things happening in the brain of somebody that's experienced oppression their whole life. Okay, so we're going to look at the healthy brain versus a brain that has experienced abuse. So we have, and again, all of these images and these references that we're pulling from are on that reference sheet. So you can go take a look at the full articles if you would like to. So this is a PET scan of the brain of a normal child over on the left. That shows the regions of the brain of high, so the red is high, and low are in the blue and black activity levels. So at birth, only primitive structures such as the brainstem, which is in the center, and the are really fully functional. And in regions like the temporal lobes and that prefrontal cortex, early childhood experiences are really what are wiring these. So when you are looking at a brain that has experienced abuse on the right-hand side, this is specifically what's the word I'm looking for, case study of a Romanian child who is orphaned and was institutionalized shortly after birth. And it shows the effects of extreme deprivation. So of extremely low stimuli, really we're thinking neglect to the max. And the temporal lobes on the top that regulate emotions and receive input from senses are nearly clear. You cannot see very much activity over here compared to what you see on these sides. And such children often suffer from emotional and cognitive problems, including emotional regulation and development and learning.
And then do you want to, oh, yes, okay. So we're going to be watching a little video here. And this is going to be talking about how trauma and PTSD can change the brain. Again, this is the prelude that like not every CASA kid has this. And we're not in an area where we're trying to diagnose children. If you are concerned about your CASA kid not getting the services that they're actually needing, you can please be an advocate for making sure that they are receiving, if diagnoses are what is hinging on them receiving those services, having those tests done, being support for them and the people who are currently taking care of them. So we're going to watch this little video and then we're going to come back and answer a couple of questions and then we're going to do an advocate one. So it's a multi-part time. I think you could just click the link there.
I was just making sure I shared with sound or they won't be able to hear this.
Hey everyone, so the team decided to do a fun competition. If you're able to make a donation today, even if it's just a few dollars, and if you're selected,
traumatic experiences like abuse, assault, or witnessing violence or tragedy can leave people feeling constantly on edge. And
if by any chance this video is having difficulties, you're going to be also sent the slides for this. So please click the link and follow that if in case anything is muddled. We're trying it for the first time where we're on camera together. So bear with us if there's any technological issues. There we go.
And also, what was the last thing I was going to say? While you're listening to this, like Claire said, there's an advocate star on this one. So be thinking about things that you might advocate for your child with the context of what this creator is talking about.
PTSD can impact your emotions, your stability, your relationships, right? Trauma can also have an impact on physical and mental health. And these are really common experiences for many people. And they're due in part to 4 ways that your brain changes after experiencing trauma. But the good news is that when you understand how trauma impacts the brain, these symptoms can often be reversed. You can learn to heal. Okay, so quick review. When you experience something threatening or dangerous or just witness something happening to someone else, your brain activates the fight, flight, freeze response, essentially the survival mode in the reptile part of your brain. This response helps keep you safe, it shuts down thinking, it releases a surge of hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and it sends blood to the big muscles so you can fight or run away. This gets your heart pounding, it speeds up your breathing, and all of this is so that you're prepared to take physical action to stay safe. And then after the threat has passed, your nervous system should go back into restorative mode, the rest and digest mode. But with PTSD, something interferes with your ability to feel safe. Your brain and your body stay stuck in this mode. So even when you're safe, your brain and your body stay tense. They're on high alert. And you don't ever or don't often revert back to that restorative mode. So when trapped in a constant trauma response, people with PTSD experience 4 types of difficult symptoms. These include painful thoughts, which is like upsetting memories, flashbacks, and memory loss. Intense emotions, feeling helpless, anxious, ashamed, scared, jumpy, angry, feeling blame or persistent negativity, or just feeling numb. Bodily changes, so these include increased heart rate, feeling jittery or on edge, startling easily, unexpected rage or tears, short and shallow breathing, panic attacks, insomnia, or nightmares. And then the 4th category of symptoms is behavioral changes. So this is usually avoidance of anything related to the trauma or its memories. Now, these symptoms show up because after experiencing trauma, your brain changes on a physical level. Now, this isn't simply damage, as people would perhaps think, but it's your brain adapting to the experience that the world isn't safe. And in my opinion, it's your brain taking measures to help you avoid future dangers. So essentially, your brain makes you more danger avoidant. Your brain is super moldable. It adapts and it rewires depending on what we experience and how we use our brain. So when we experience trauma, here are 4 ways that the brain changes or adapts after that experience. So first, the amygdala. This is an area of the brain that scans for threats and it connects memories and emotions. So this is kind of like the smoke alarm of the brain. And after trauma, it becomes much more active. It becomes much more sensitive and more likely to alert, to turn on that alarm when it perceives a threat. Survivors become less tolerant of stress, and little things make them feel more anxious. So common things like loud noises, people entering a room from behind, or seeing someone who reminds them of an aggressor, these can all trigger that threat response, even when the loud noise is just fireworks, or when that person with a beard is actually just a waiter, right? I've had clients who felt triggered by grasshoppers or radiators, and both of these things are actually safe, but the amygdala associates them with trauma and then sets off that red alert. So to summarize, with PTSD, the amygdala becomes more sensitive. Okay, second, brain scans indicate that after trauma, the hippocampus shrinks. So the hippocampus is the part of the brain that processes emotions and memories. After trauma, stress hormones essentially kill off cells in the hippocampus, making it less effective at processing emotions. This also makes it hard for the brain to distinguish between the past and the present. So this is essentially what a flashback is. It's your brain experiencing a memory that feels like it's happening right now. People who've experienced trauma, they may have missing memories, fragmented memories, or painful memories that pop up when they don't want them. And when these memories pop up, they re-trigger the amygdala. So essentially the amygdala perceives the memories as a new threat and sends off, that alarm that restarts that trauma cycle, that whole flooding of the fight, flight, freeze response and all those physical changes and the stress hormones and all of that. Now, these changes to the hippocampus, they can also contribute to short-term memory loss. But the connection between the hippocampus and the amygdala gets stronger. Like these two love talking to each other now. And so essentially this maintains that fear response over time. Even if you can't remember the traumatic event, your smoke alarm is still going to blare with the slightest trigger. Okay, number 3, the prefrontal cortex shrinks. So this is the part of the brain that essentially handles higher order thinking and planning, rational thought and language, things like that. This part of the brain becomes disrupted by constantly reverting back to that fight, flight, freeze part of the brain, or the reptile part of the brain. So when you're stuck in fight, flight, freeze, or hypervigilance, the thinking part of the brain gets turned down, and the way that neuroplasticity works is the more we use a part of the brain, the more it grows pathways there. But the less we use a part of the brain, those pathways gets trimmed. So when we can't use reason to think through our traumatic memories or sensations, then it makes it hard for us to override that danger signal that the amygdala and hippocampus are sending. And it makes it harder to remind ourselves that the danger is not real. So because that prefrontal cortex has shrunk a little bit, it makes it harder to process through those memories. It makes it harder to speak about what happened. It makes it harder to think clearly and rationally. And you can see how a person can get trapped in a loop of trauma if they don't get treatment. So these symptoms just make it harder and harder to escape the cycle of PTSD. Okay, number 4, the last way your brain is impacted is really through the broader nervous system. So this constant flooding with stress hormones keeps the body locked in an activated sympathetic state, or the fight, flight, freeze state. It's also known as hyperarousal. So you feel constantly on edge, you feel jittery, you feel stressed out until you get exhausted. Then you have adrenal fatigue, right? You shut down and you feel depressed. So being stuck in this state of an overactive, dysregulated nervous system leads to a lot of strain on the body, and that can contribute to chronic illnesses like autoimmune disorders, low functioning of the immune system, diabetes, obesity, muscle tension, chronic pain, and problems with like sleep and the gut and your heart health. So those are the 4 ways that trauma impacts your brain and nervous system in general. But just like how your brain changed in response to trauma, it can heal too, and this is called neuroplasticity. So your brain adapted the trauma response as a functional way to deal with real threats and dangers. Your brain's not out to get you, but it also has a built-in ability to change in response to healing and perceived safety. So the amygdala can learn to chill out. The hippocampus can relearn to process emotions, and your nervous system can strengthen its ability to revert back to that parasympathetic or that rest and digest response. We can target these structures in the brain and in the body through cognitive work and through body-based work. So a couple of the ways that we can do this are through yoga, mindfulness, writing exercises. So just think of this, right? You're having a trauma response, you're having these big intense emotions, and you sit down and you make yourself write about it. That's turning on the prefrontal cortex. That's clarifying that in the present moment you are safe. It's helping your hippocampus process through memories, and that sends a message to your amygdala that you're actually safe, right? So something as simple as a writing exercise can help rewire your brain from that trauma. Okay. More types of treatments include CBT, EMDR, somatic experience. These are all treatments that help your brain and body rewire and restore your inner sense of safety and clarity. Now, there's a lot of studies out there that show that your brain can rewire like this, but here, let me give you one example. Research using MRI scans of the brain show that mindfulness practice is correlated with growth in the hippocampus and shrinking of the amygdala. So essentially, it reverses the effects of trauma. I teach a bunch of these skills on my channel, so check out my Healing Trauma playlist if you'd like to learn more, or you could check out my free course, Grounding Skills for Anxiety and Trauma. The link's in the description below. And in an upcoming video, we're going to talk about how being transformed by trauma can lead to good things. So please remember, there's always room for growth and healing and change, and it just comes from the tiny little baby steps that you can take. So thank you for watching. I love you all, and take care.
Okay, so we're just gonna be navigating back to our little slide here.
Yeah, thank you all for watching and taking time to do the therapy in a nutshell video. Again, hopefully it worked for you, and if it didn't, hopefully you found the link and were able to access it anyway. So now we're going to take a moment to go to our activity book on the Advocate page, and you're going to think of ways that you could advocate for a child that you are noticing seems to be in chronic stress. So that could be a child that maybe is a youth, 13, high school, middle school through high school age, that seems to be getting triggered at school or in their resource home. And how can you help create strategies or get them engaged in therapy or in an activity that could, again, work on their body and their mind. Maybe it's integrating mindfulness throughout their school day, or giving them a chance to do reflective writing instead of getting sent to the principal's office. Just different things that you could advocate for them to help them regulate their emotions. And you can also think about this in the lens of elementary age students and what might be appropriate for their age. I think this is even things that you see with your toddlers, when babies come into care that have experienced extreme neglect. And, there's often what they call colic, where babies are crying and crying and crying. That could be a result of the trauma and the neglect that they experienced versus, general, there's no reason for colic. So we just have to think outside the box. What are some ways that you could advocate for your CASA child if they are experiencing heightened anxiety and they seem to be constantly pulled into that space of acting through their amygdala? We'll give you all a moment and then come back to us. Ooh, that made us really big. I wasn't trying to do that. Okay, so after you've come back from doing your Advocate, you're going to go back to your folder, your activity packet, surprise, surprise, to talk about the part that says consider. So it'll be under the reflection prompts for therapy in a nutshell. How many of the symptoms described in the video does your CASA child exhibit? And what are the impacts of these symptoms on your CASA child's life? So just reflect from the video.
And if you need to go back and watch it at all to be like, to kind of maybe keep a tally or write them down if it's giving like terminology to some things. Yeah. Please take a minute or time to do that.
Yeah, and if this also triggers more things you'd like to advocate for, you can bounce back and forth between this writing prompt and then the advocating ideas.
And using it as like a brainstorming session.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maybe send some of those ideas to your case supervisor.
And an email. Love that.
Okay. We're going to assume you are now back after pausing, and we are moving on. Since you can't move on until you push play.
Do you want me to do
asynchronous? Yes.
Okay, so to give Hannah a breather, because she's been absolutely doing fantabulous during this training, this is so much up her alley. Here's just some reflection time. So we're going to be asking ourselves how does the information on how trauma impacts the brain, so far in this training, kind of change your thought about things that maybe your CASA kid has done in the past, or, when you read your initial case packet, is that the term? Okay, I forgot. It's been a minute. But that initial, the like 1,000-page document thing where it says like how the kid is doing and all of the different things that, the most like intense moments of their life, whether it was reported or other people had witnessed it, and is supposed to inform you to how you can engage with the child in a more meaningful way, but sometimes can create like biases on our end. How has this training been able to like inform you on, oh, that gives context to this? Like what I thought was like my child, like this CASA kid, let's say acting out and like just hitting things, including themselves, not being able to understand that. And it's like, oh my gosh, why would they do that? How can some of this like make it more understandable now? And then being able to influence your understanding of the original caretakers, you know what I mean? I think that at CASA, there's a huge conversation most of the time that's happening that it's not villainizing these people who, let's say as a byproduct of their actions, these children have been abused and neglected. But being able to understand, maybe, let's say if we're looking at a generational trauma sort of situation or chronic poverty, over the course of not just the original caregivers' lives, but like their parents and their grandparents, or none of them in their family lineage for many generations have been able to finish primary school, and the ways that that automatically is working against their favor to be able to offer the most support, because there are things that, school systems and that conversation being put to the side, and not really what we're engaging in right now. There are life skills that are built in those places that if for whatever reason, you're not learning in that way, that can have a trickle-down effect in your life, into your kid's life. And then what are some of the main thoughts and takeaways that you're getting from this, whether you're like, oh my gosh, I really need to look into what PTSD or EMD are, like whether it's like a terminology thing, or being able to maybe have more meaningful conversations with your case supervisor or your CASA kids or their original guardians or their current guardians about how to support them, or something that you noticed a bit ago that you're kind of reframing from this. And then we do want to kind of like ask the question of, are there any oppression, like systems of oppression that your CASA kid is experiencing? Is there any that their original caregivers are experiencing? Is there any that their resource placement is currently going through right now? And is there anything that can be done around those situations? Whether that's, let's say that the resource placement is just continually low on diapers, like what can you or caseworker at child welfare do in order to make sure that that is one less barrier to this already, nuanced situation, for lack of a better term. And then is this one on the packet?
Yes.
So there's a place for this. So if you want to take some time, write some things down, think through some stuff. If you need to come back, please do that. Like pause this for an extended period of time. Whatever needs to happen on your end, please do that. And then we're going to just take a pause right here and then welcome you back in a sec. Is there anything else you'd add?
No, I think that Claire did it beautifully, and just make sure that you're thinking about, when you're considering what types of oppression your family might be experiencing, how is that triggering that stress response system? Okay. Elevator music while you pause and come back.
Maybe like the Jeopardy music.
Yeah.
That would be really funny.
Okay, so now we're going to get into emotional regulation and de-escalation. Going back, go back. Want to move our box. Okay, so there is something called dynamic brain changes during stress, resilience coping, and risky coping. One moment here. So there are some skills in emotional regulation that you can use to help create resiliency. And then obviously there are some things that people do that are a little bit more risky. So you have to be able to navigate between higher processing and risk assessment. And I think one of the things that was said, and I'm getting a little off topic here, but in the nutshell, therapy in a nutshell video, that is really important is that we can actually see that the resilient coping mechanisms help recreate matter in the brain in those areas that experienced the brain decline from the stress. So the brain is very, very adaptive. It's very malleable. And even though we lost from trauma, we were seeing that loss in the prefrontal cortex. With resilient coping strategies, you're able to actually recreate that matter in the prefrontal cortex to increase your ability to reason, and you can decrease the matter in the amygdala. So it's doing the exact reverse. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit. So if we're thinking about trauma and the brain, and we're thinking about those things that are creating the atrophy, that are taking away from our prefrontal cortex and our amygdala. We're thinking about stress, and we're thinking about maybe physical pain, emotional dysregulation, all of these kind of more negative things. And when we're thinking about healing the brain, we're going to go in the exact opposite direction. We're going to be talking about meditating, about mindfulness, breathing, things that are going to decrease that stress and increase our ability to emotionally regulate. And that is going to help us, again, grow that prefrontal cortex and shrink that amygdala so that we are able to have our brains, or in the case of the CASA child's brains, back in control of our emotions and not in dysregulation. So we have in your handout, in that activity packet towards the end, all of these different types of emotional regulation strategies, including ground breathing meditation, and let's see, no, the other ones aren't on the slideshow. Starfish breathing, where you're breathing in and out of the starfish, and there's a snake breathing exercise. So you're going to take a moment, go through, look at the different meditation and mindfulness activities that are in there, and think of ways that you might advocate to help your child incorporate these into their day. There's some scenarios that are given in the activity sheet where it will say, you're going to a home visit and child is dysregulating every time you leave. So an example of this that I experienced as a caseworker is I worked with a child that experienced extreme nonverbal, low functioning autism. And he moved from home to home to home, and most of those placement transitions were done by me. I had to move him each time the placement fell through. I had to remove him from mom a few times. And seeing me became a trigger for him because he didn't know where he was going or what was happening. And it wasn't his fault that people couldn't manage his high needs and that he needed to move homes. It was the state's fault for having a lack of placement options for him. So the community failed him, but he doesn't understand that. So he's just continually traumatized as he moves from place to place. So seeing me used to create an instant reaction that he would go into tears, he would not want to talk to anybody, and he would become dysregulated the rest of the day, even after I left. And so what we ended up doing was having a different caseworker that could go out and see that child for me, that they did not know, so that the child wasn't triggered. And I had tried doing some, breathing with him and just sitting with him and creating new experiences. That clearly wasn't what that child needed right then. So I asked for a different caseworker to go out. So ways that you can help a child when they are having that lid flipped to reground and regulate their emotions. And remember, again, our words matter. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So we we're again talking about creating new neural pathways in the brain to help us, instead of having these maladaptive behaviors when we're triggered, how do we create adaptive and functional behaviors? Okay.
Can you do this slide? This one?
Yes.
Yeah. So this, it can feel tangential, so I'll try and, weave it in as best as I can. So we also are wanting to recognize that with emotional regulation practices, it is not to try and quell people and make it so that they're not experiencing their emotions. It's to try and assist with it not being a debilitating thing that takes over a day or a week and is really, really difficult to come back from. Or maybe it's the frequency of it or the severity of it. You know what I mean? Like, we can also think for our own selves that there are times where we see something and we get really emotional and we give ourselves the time to do that. These practices are a way to kind of build structures around giving yourself the designated time and space to be able to regulate. And it's not about the rules, or it's not that it has to, like, let's say you're doing the starfish breathing with someone and it's just not working and none of the other things are really working. Sometimes it is just about like sitting there or finding an alternative. And the goal is to be able to build like stepstone ways of coping. You know what I mean? We're not wanting someone who cannot see the color red and becoming immediately dysregulated to then, this unideal option or reality where they're not doing these things at all. It's to be able so that they are not as having to be hit by so many things all the time, so that then they can like feel more of an inhabitor of their life, and then being able, you're able to then make impacts and changes in your own life from that space so much easier than always being in a survival mode. So we wrote here just as like that this is a way to step into kind of like a whole new world, and it also takes so much time and it takes so much support, and these practices are a way of doing it. And if they do not fit, like let's say you are dealing with a teenager who is just so full of anger and rage, and they are needing like a somatic thing, they are needing to do something. There are also many more things here. So the world is your oyster and theirs as well. Please look up if none of these things are working. A lot of them are focused on breathing because breathing is the most accessible thing that we have.
Yeah. And you'll see some are geared more towards little kids, like rainbow grounding, the snake and the starfish. But then there are also activities that are geared more towards youth and adults. The breathe in and out for your belly breathing, the 4-7-8 breathing, and even these ones that are more like progressive muscle relaxation that work really well for releasing anxiety. So I just take a few moments, look these over, look at the scenarios, and think of some different ways that you could advocate for children, and then come back to us.
And then also try some of them out yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Practice. Okay. And by the time you get back and pause, we'll be on another slide. If I can get back to it. You moved this last time.
You just got to grab it. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, we're going to move to resilience, and we're going to move this out of the middle of the screen.
Okay. You want me? I can do it. Take a beat. Okay, so we want to talk about resilience in a couple of different forms. So this is also another buzzword that's going around a lot. And I think the first place that I really want to start with is resilience isn't a perfect practice. And I think being very realistic with the fact that we work with children and we are working with people who are under oppressive systems, the child welfare is trying their best. There are huge things within that system and the court system and even CASA that are getting worked through. They are attempts at better situations, but they are not at an ideal place, because nothing is at an ideal place right now in life. So with recognition to that, we want to make sure that we're not only just congratulating people or recognizing resilience as this kind of perfected version that I think we want to see sometimes. So I really love the visual on the right here that shows all of these different things that can go into this concept of resilience, whether that's like the willingness to be flexible. Let's say that someone does not like trying new foods, and one day they end up wanting to try something that's like a little out of their comfort zone. Maybe an apple is a safe food, but then they want to try applesauce. That is big. That is a very big moment for that person. Ability to solve problems, even if it's like, oh my gosh, my shoelaces are knotted, and on their own they untie them themselves. You know what I mean? Like, these are things that can add wind under our sails, and we can be amazing cheerleaders for and with folks. For so many people, and I would say everyone, first of all, getting up every day and engaging in the world and engaging in your life, whether that is you just fermenting in bed for a bit, or going out and solving world issues in your own, is huge. That when we are confronted with other options, that we could not be here, and that people are making an active decision every day, that is major. And yeah, so I don't want to necessarily like repeat all these, but I kind of want to be able to like underline some of them, is that resilience is also about the skill being built over time. And I love the visual of like stepstones. You know what I mean? If we are in a position in our lives, or these kids are, where nothing is known, we don't know what we want to do, we are just so all over the place because we haven't had a single stable thing in goodness knows how long, no one is answering our questions. We want to go to basics, you know what I mean? Like, the basics are going to be the things that are huge. And then building to this more complex way of like handling, managing and engaging in our own lives. We also really want to take time to recognize the natural resilience that people have. What might be the barest minimum for you could be a testament to someone's like strength in that situation. Being alive is huge. I don't, let me find my words here, is like, especially when you are aware that there are other options and there are things that could be done so that that is not what your current reality is. Just being here is a really big deal. So when we think of maybe a original caregiver coming to court, but they're showing up late and they're really frazzled, it is huge that they are there. You know what I mean? Like, them coming and having to confront this situation is a major point of resilience and engaging. And those are some of those signs to look for about like where this person is in this journey, in this path.
Yeah, and being careful not to hold everybody to that same standard of resiliency. Like, we need to be careful when we use words like grit and just say, well, they don't have a whole lot of grit. They're not just getting up and doing it, because what you start off with every day, and your ability to say like, get up and brush your teeth, maybe that's a mindless thing for you. But for somebody else, they have to sit there and force themselves out of bed to go brush their teeth, and it's actually a lot more exhausting. So just knowing that everybody is at a different level.
Yes, and I think that the last bullet point here really, really addresses that. Is we call it the bootstraps moment, which is the idea of like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like just put some hard work behind this, just get a job, just do this, these oversimplifications that maybe if you're coming from a background where you have connections, or you have internet access, or you have a vehicle, it makes those 100 times easier to do. And tune in for a later session when we go through a day of stress with a imagined person based off of, different people that Hannah and I have worked with, and being able to kind of put yourself in the shoes of what that could feel like if this is if all of this is not something that you've experienced before. But that being said, resilience is huge. It comes in big to small ways. All of it should be congratulated. We want to be cheerleaders in this position, and advocates and supporters when we can. and being able to also understand how much of life is someone living or just surviving. Because, you know, maybe we have the luxury of being able to enjoy and relax and decompress after a stressful day. But let's say somebody does not have a home or any form of shelter to go back to, and all they need to do is like scream and cry because it's been so difficult, but they are not allowed to do that in a public place. Things like that that help us. I'm a huge proponent. I scream in my car all the time. That's like half of what's getting me through stuff right now. And if I didn't have that, or I can't scream in this building because then it would set off alarm signals for other people. There's a way that our access to things and spaces can, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, can further aid in our resilience or not. So that's why applying like a stepstone method is huge, working with what you have right now, which is why we're using a lot of breath, because hopefully people have that.
Okay. We're on nurturing resiliency. So there's a few different types of resiliency, including physical, mental, emotional, and social community. Again, you can practice mindfulness that recreates that gray matter in the brain. Gratitude can help rewire the brain. There's actually some really great studies about gratitude and mindfulness that show that it even can help recreate gray matter in people that experience Alzheimer's. So these are just really functional tools for everybody to use, and they have great outcomes for people that experience depression and anxiety. It's actually been shown to decrease symptoms of depression and anxiety, and can be used as a way to manage that pretty well. It also connects. Where are we? Yes. So for some gratitude exercises, you can make a list of everything you're thankful for. You know, try to reframe your negative thoughts into positive ones. You can even just put little quotes around your house, can be really helpful. Find ways to savor that morning routine, to really sip that coffee and maybe take a whole minute where you're drinking your coffee and you're focusing on the sensations, the smells, the flavors, the feelings of that coffee, and take a minute to practice gratitude. Right now, for when I walk out the door every morning to take my son to the bus, he has a little practice of gratitude on the door to remind him to be grateful and to hopefully engage in, you know, positive behaviors throughout his day in kindergarten. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. And also remember that words matter. We're going to attach a document to this training that's called Words Matter. You may have already seen it or you may not have. It's going to start being included in the new CASA training manual. So you will be getting access to that. But it gives you some different ways to reframe common phrases, such as a dirty UA, instead saying that it is a UA that is positive for methamphetamines. So not implying that that person is dirty in any way, and not talking about them in ways that could be harmful. And instead talking more in like a factual way. So we hear the new term houselessness, not very new anymore. It's been around for a couple of years, but some people are still adjusting to it, versus like homeless, because right, if you don't have a home, is more of a sense of like who is with you in a feeling. Anywhere can be a home, but people are experiencing houselessness because they don't have a place that is a house or an apartment to stabilize that home, right? But home is usually more about like your people and your connections and your feelings than it is about like an actual place. Mm-hmm. So make sure you're looking at that Words Matter sheet. It has different sections in it to talk about different people that experience different forms of oppression and help you reframe some of the common words that you might be using.
And also it can inform if the case supervisor that you're working with is making edits to your reports and using those terms, and maybe there's, you know, hasn't been necessarily conversations on that before. Really encourage for you to reach out, because case supervisors are really great about being able to talk about that, and then also knowing the specific situation that your kid or kids are going through as well.
Absolutely. And gratitude is a great way to help inspire hope. So
Yes.
it's a great practice for you and anybody in your life, your CASA kids. Find different ways to practice gratitude day to day. Oh, hey, look at us. We have a little snapshot of the words matter. So another thing when you're talking about when you're talking to kids or anybody in general, make sure that you are being careful with the words that you're engaging in to maybe de-escalate someone. We all know that when somebody says calm down, it usually makes you do the exact opposite. So some different ways that you could do that are saying, let's take a deep breath together and tell me how I can help you right now. Or instead of saying, stop crying, you can say, it's okay to feel sad. Do you need space for that right now? Is there anything I can do to help you while you're sitting in this feeling? Instead of saying don't hit or don't kick, we say we need to be gentle and kind with our bodies. So reframing these words to tell kids what you want to see from them or to tell other people what you want to see with them, especially when we're talking about, that toddler age up to about like school age, that rephrasing to what you want to see can be really impactful. Because they don't know, they might not know any other way besides hitting or kicking. So when you say don't hit or kick, they're going to keep doing it because they still need to express that emotion. So maybe saying we need to be kind and gentle with our bodies. Would you like to scream in a pillow?
Yeah.
Do you want a hug while you cry?
And it's also kind of pointing to this being curious about what someone is going through, and wanting to learn more about like what is getting them to that state so that you can help and assist in those situations based off of the relationship that you have with them. So it's not just I'm seeing someone in anguish right now and I'm just watching and telling them to stop, but like being aware that you are a person in the room and you have a relationship with this person or this kid, and there is an impact that could be made there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, especially when you're looking at the like are you okay? Instead of me just saying, Claire, are you okay? And that kind of forces this yes out of people most of the time because they don't want to not be okay. Just saying, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you need in this moment really opens up that conversation instead of giving a yes or no answer. And we also always want to try to be person centered or person first. So that looks like saying, a child that experiences autism or a person that is fill in the blank. There are a lot of people that do prefer that are on the autism spectrum that will say, I am autistic. So always going with what that person wants to be recognized as or how they want to be talked about is the most important. And you can ask people that question. Also, we want to be respectful. We really want to be conscious of our voice, tone, volume, cadence. How are we communicating? What is our body language? Are we cross-armed while we're talking to a kid and telling them to stop crying? Or are we open?
Those nonverbal cues
Yes.
that are conveying how we're actually feeling and thinking of a person, and especially because CASAs really can exist in the realm of judgment, and child welfare can very much have that vibe sometimes, especially with going in and separating families. That can kind of be an unfortunate foundation, making sure that you're kind of going in a way where you are just being receptive to what's there and also responsive.
And one of, CASA's key things is to cause no harm. So when we're communicating, we should hopefully be communicating in a way that's helpful and hopeful and versus harmful. And also being objective, neutral, and collaborative, all things that are promoting that sense of belonging, that sense of you're okay to be in this space with me right now versus I want to shut you down and control my space to be what I want it to be, and your feelings, your thoughts don't belong here right now. Stop crying. I'm over this. I just want you to be okay. Is that isolation that you don't belong, your feelings, your emotions don't belong here. And instead, we really want to embrace that. What do you need right now? How are you feeling? that open body language, that I am here to help you in this space, in this time, the way you need to be helped. Okay, so now pick 3 of your advocate goals and maybe start thinking of ways that you could work on them and work towards, advocating for your child. Maybe communicate those with your case supervisor. Or if you have a peer mentor, talk through them with your peer mentor, your co-CASA, whoever's on your team, and just process what you've talked about today and your amazing thoughts that you've had. Our last reflective exercise is to go back into your book and talk about, did this training, or your book, your activity packet, and I've been in school too many times, clearly. Did this training challenge any of your existing beliefs about trauma? What are some actionable steps you could take to becoming more trauma informed as a CASA? And are there any key insights you want to take away from this training?
Yeah. So coming back from that, thank you so much all for engaging in this. We really want to encourage you all to follow the survey link at the bottom of the email that's being sent out with this trainings and for all the other trainings, to give very thoughtful, we love a good constructive criticism moment. So much appreciation for that. And yeah, this is a bit of a heavier topic. We acknowledge and appreciate it, and we just thankful that you are here. And any last notes from you, Hannah?
No, thank you for bearing with us as we go into one of the topics that I can get a little off topic on because I love it and I'm very passionate about it.
But it's great because now we're doing a virtual one where we don't just have to be within 1 hour or an hour and 30 minutes. So thank you for the space.
Yes.
And hope you all have a great rest of your day. Shake it out, stand up, especially if you've just been powering through this or multiple of the other trainings, and hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
Everyone.
Bye.